Welcome to the Talking Timber podcast with me, Mike Jeffrey.
And me, Keith Fryer.
And on Talking Timber, as our regular listeners, which we hope we've got a few.
Yeah, hopefully by now we might have the odd one.
They'll know that we touch on the news and the issues and developments in the timber industry widely and tackle a range of subjects in our various editions.
Yeah, and you can get us on www.talkingtimber.co.uk.
And on Spotify and YouTube.
Oh yeah, don't forget them. I know. But I think today's quite an interesting one, isn't it? We've got Paul Brennan on, who's got a book out called Timber! It's got that exclamation mark at the end. It's how wood can help save the world from climate breakdown, and goes on to explain exactly how to do that in a couple of 100 pages, I think it is. And so, I'm really looking forward to this.
Yeah, it's a good read, I must admit.
Yeah.
And So Paul wrote this book in a personal capacity, but it draws on his experience as Public Affairs Director at the Confederation of European Woodworking Industries, or CEWA, and also he's Head of Public Affairs at the Confederation of Timber Industries in the UK.
Yeah.
And he was previously, a member of the European Parliament, where he was involved with climate change legislation. And he also spent 15 years at relief aid development charity Christian Aid, where he focused on the impact of climate change on poverty around the world. And the book, Timber, the core focus is on the critical need to decarbonise construction and buildings in use if we are to slow and ultimately halt global warming. Combined, these account for an estimated 39% of greenhouse gas emissions worldwide. So, Paul, why did you at this point decide to write this book? What was your sort of stepping off point for this?
Well, hello. The reason for writing the book was I felt that we've got a great story to tell in the wood value chain, and for a mixture of reasons, we were rather stuck in the margins with this story. And I thought a book was maybe a way of trying to break it into the more mainstream.
Yeah.
To take these issues that we deal with daily and get them out to a wider audience. And I think I had a bit at the back of my mind, drawing on the work that I did with Christian Aid all those years ago on fair trade.
Yeah.
When fair trade was an issue that was in the margins, you could go to the Oxfam shop and buy some fairly traded coffee, and it might be available at the back of the church on sale on a Sunday, but it wasn't in the supermarket. It wasn't in the mainstream. And the campaign was to get it from the margins into the mainstream. And it took a while, 10, 15 years, I think, probably, if the truth be told. But we ultimately broke, with the help of others, Oxfam and CAFOD, we broke fairly traded coffee initially and then other products into the mainstream. And now they're commonly found in the supermarket. People expect to be able to have that choice. And I think it's the same with wood in the built environment. It's been around, it's there, but it's been in the margins, and can we get it out into the mainstream? And there's indications that we're starting to do that. And the book was my contribution to giving it all a bit of a push.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly what has happened, hasn't it? I mean, my assumption is that you've aimed it very much at people coming into the industry, or people wanting to try and understand who are aligned with the industry. Who's your sort of target readership, Paul?
Well, you're spot on. I had this conversation with the publisher, who was obviously keen that I exactly do this. So who is the core audience?
Yeah.
And I was all for, it's for everyone. It's a book I'm trying to get everyone to read.
Yeah.
And the publisher said, well, yes, we would like everyone to read it, and he certainly would like everyone to buy it as the publisher. But the reality is, when you're writing it, Paul, you need to have sort of 4 or 5 people, imaginary people in front of you. And who are they? That's the core audience. And partly, I think, because Agenda Publishing, who publish Timber, or an academic publisher, we settled on the sort of first-year university student. In a way, it would be great if Timber was on the reading list published by all our universities for a range of courses, which would include architecture, engineering, anything to do more broadly with the built environment, but then also agriculture, forestry, material science, those kind of issues. And it would be the kind of book you would read as you transitioned out of the sixth form into your first year at university. And it would be a primer in that sense, and it would introduce you to some of the key issues that get thrown up when you talk about expanding the amount of timber in the built environment. So, for instance, well, that's all very well, Paul, but is there enough wood to expand it? Well, that gives you 1, 2, 3 chapters. And the inevitable question, well, what about fire in big buildings made out of wood? And it's the sort of chapters kind of, the headings sort of naturally appeared because they're the things that pop up when you have a conversation with people about these kind of issues. But that was the core audience, was could we get it as an introduction to these wider subjects? And then people would read it and hopefully think, I'd like to find out more about that. And the footnotes would enable them to go off and read in more depth and in more detail. It's definitely not a technical book. I've had umpteen people tell me it's pretty easy to read.
It is.
Yeah,
it is.
But there is technical information in there, but it's presented in an accessible way.
It's very good technical information. I can genuinely say, and, I think people would call me a bit of a timber nerd, but I genuinely learned a lot more from reading the book.
And it's precisely the audience the timber industry needs to go after, isn't it? I mean, it's been a constant concern as long as I've been writing about the industry, that not enough time is given to timber in construction amongst, for architects, engineers, other construction professionals in their training. Relative to other materials, timber gets sort of scant coverage.
I found that. I many years ago, I used to work with the UCL College of Architecture called the Bartlett, and the principals of that section of the university, we would talk regularly, and they would say that if you talk about flying hours to become an architect, if there's X thousand hours of study, probably literally a few hours would be involved with timber, which is terrible. So we really hope.
I think it's even worse for the civil engineers, the engineers.
Yeah.
I was in the Thumbria University a few weeks back, speaking to 70 first-year students on the civil engineering course. And the lecturer said to me, I'm getting you in, Paul, because no one's talked to them about wood yet. And that's after, halfway through the first year. And I was the first person to talk to them about wood.
Wow.
But I mean, we can go more into the sort of drill down into the detail of the content of the book. But I mean, the overall, the core message is pretty stark, isn't it? I mean, I think I've got a quote here from it. Said, there can be no solution to climate change unless we reduce emissions associated with concrete, steel, and their fellow carbon-intensive materials. And the clock is ticking, isn't it? We just radically need to shrink the carbon footprint of construction.
Without any doubt, it's such a major contributor to carbon emissions. I mean, way beyond 2 or 3%. Concrete alone is the single biggest contributor to the climate change problem. I mean, it has an immense carbon footprint of around about 8% of all global carbon emissions are the result of the manufacture and use of concrete. I mean, it's a staggering figure. Yeah. And you add in steel, and that more than doubles it. Doubles it. Steel has the redeeming feature that it can be recycled in a way that concrete can't. But the recycling process itself involves a large amount of energy, which is likely to be drawn from fossil fuel. So the problem continues. And then once you actually have your buildings, certainly in the northern hemisphere, they need to be heated because they're not particularly well insulated. And that's another massive use of fossil fuels. And that gets you up to around about 40% of global carbon emissions are directly linked to the built environment. I mean, concrete's footprint is bigger than the European Union's carbon footprint. Wow. I mean, that's how problematic it is as a material. And so we need to both reduce its use and where we are using it, we need to make it less worse. There's talk of green cement. I think it's less worse cemented in that sense. But that's what we need to be using, and we overuse it. And having said that, we also overuse timber. So the whole material efficiency across the board in the built environment is going to become increasingly important. Whatever the material is, can you use it and use less of it to do what you need to do?
Yeah, and making the task even more urgent is population growth, isn't it? Because we are going to need to be building more houses around the world, and so we just have to build them greener.
Absolutely, and I mean, I wouldn't criticize all of the green NGOs, but certainly some of the green NGOs put forward a message which is along the lines of we don't need to build anything more, we've got enough buildings. Well, that's clearly not true in the developing world, in the global south. And I can say that, particularly because of my background working for Christian Aid as a development agency. So we've got countries around the world like Egypt where the population is going to double in the next 20, 30, 40 years. And they aren't all going to be able to stay and live at home with mom and dad. They're all going to need places to live. When they're building near to Cairo, if you like, a second Cairo. And it's all going to be built with concrete and steel. That's the way it's headed. And that just exacerbates the problem.
I think I heard, and again, I've got to be careful, so note of caution around this, but I think China, they say, has poured more concrete in the last 2 years than all the concrete that's ever been poured since concrete was pretty much ever invented. It's something along those lines. The scale of it is just massive.
And you're right. It's staggering. But I think what I was very keen with the book that it didn't become a kind of doom and gloom book. So I really corralled into chapter 1 only. The problem. And then after that, I was trying to talk as much as possible about solutions.
Well, let's get into that, shall we? I mean, chapter 2 is how can we decarbonise the built environment? So give us a little bit of a synopsis or a summary of that, Paul.
Well, those carbon emissions that come from the built environment are essentially in two parts. One's considerably bigger than the other. So the smaller of the two is the emissions that come from the materials that we use when we build, the concrete, the steel, the brick, the block, the plasterboard, which all have high energy use in the process of manufacture. And while in the future, more and more of that energy could be green energy, at the moment, it's predominantly fossil fuel energy. So that's hence the carbon footprint. And that's why these materials have what we call high levels of embodied carbon. It's intrinsically in there. So you put up plasterboard, you put up brick, you put up concrete, and it's got a great big carbon footprint that goes with it. So reducing the amount of those materials that we use and substituting where appropriate with nature-based materials. The main one in the case of this book is timber, wood, but there's also others. There's hemp, there's bamboo, etc. So there's plenty of nature-based materials that can help us in decarbonising the built environment when it comes to construction. But timber is the key material, certainly in the Northern Hemisphere, and it's where we've got most experience and knowledge to build on. So by substituting out wherever possible the highly embodied materials and replacing them with the lower carbon footprint materials, which have the additional advantage of not just being lower in their embodied carbon, they have the advantage that they themselves store carbon. So while they were growing in the forest, the wood was sequestering the carbon. When you fell the tree and turn it into sawn timber and move it into the built environment, it continues to store the carbon that it sequestered when the tree grew. You're not releasing it back into the atmosphere. So we can build the carbon stored in the built environment by using timber-based products. So it's a kind of win-win in that sense, substituting and storing. So that tackles that initial component of the emissions that come from the materials we use. That's around 10, 12% of the footprint. And then the bigger chunk is from the use of energy to particularly heat our buildings, but increasingly cool them as well. The energy we use to cool them in the summer. And that then is all about insulation and all about building better insulated buildings which don't need to use as much energy to heat them, cool them going forwards. And that's particularly the case in many places in the global south, where the energy that's being used in places like China and India to cool buildings now is phenomenal. And if we can make the buildings better insulated so that they work as cooler in the summer months, the hotter months, and warmer in the colder months, and that's what the big way of then reducing the second part of the carbon emissions from the built environment. So it's about switching out where appropriate. We won't be able to do it in all cases, but switching out the fossil fuel-based materials for the nature-based materials and improving the level of insulation.
Yeah, and you also, in the book, you cover the fact that latest developments in timber products for construction, such as engineered wood products, such as cross-laminated timber and glulam, actually make timber better able to substitute these man-made materials, particularly steel and concrete.
Yeah, so in the UK context, but it's essentially the same across Europe as it is in the USA and Canada, the opportunity is to build more of the family houses with a timber frame, as they do in Scotland already. And on the bigger buildings is to start using, where we're a long way to go, but still very much in the foothills, but to start using the engineered timbers, which you've just referred to, which enable us to build at height and scale in a way that we've not been able to do in the past. I mean, the family home built from timber is something that's been around for hundreds of years.
Yes.
But the 18, 20-story building
I wanted to ask
timber is new.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about that because in chapter 4, we get into wooden skyscrapers, and having personally stayed in a 20-story high wooden hotel, and it was an amazing experience. I mean, where are we on the scale? I know it's a bit sort of a silly statement, really, about how tall, but where are we these days, Paul?
Well, it's around about 18, 20 stories. They're the tallest of our all timber frame buildings in the world. But we have taller buildings that are being built. 25 stories, I think, is highly likely. The Swiss are building around 25 stories. And the Australians, New Zealand, I think, will go up to 30. But in a way, it's a little bit of a red herring.
Yeah, I agree.
It's the mid-rise, it's the 10, 12, 14-story that most urban cities would do well to have more of from the point of view of tackling climate change. But it is useful in that it sends a signal, it captures the media attention. Oh, can you really go that tall now? So I don't have a problem with every 2 or 3 years there being one that's yet taller. But getting taller and taller is not what this is about. It's getting more and more, it's about quantity rather than height. So many more mid-rise buildings rather than a few very tall timber buildings is what we're after. And it's not just the apartment and office blocks. It's also the schools, the hospitals, the libraries, the cinemas, the places of worship. And there was a great report came out last month from the architect firm DRMM, who have offices in London and Berlin. And they were looking at, they took 5 mass timber buildings in the UK, all the different type of usage. They looked at the well-being benefits of those buildings, which is very interesting. But they also looked at the substitution impact and the amount of carbon that they were storing. And there was a range on that, but the average figure was a mass timber building in the UK storing more than 1,000 tons of carbon. more than 1,000 tons. And that compares with a family home where a timber frame combined with maybe a wood fibre insulation would be maybe storing 8 tons. So a family home doing 8 tons and a mass timber building doing 1,000 on the frame, and then maybe another 200 tons on a wood fibre or hemp insulation. So it's the big storage hits come from building these big buildings. But as we know in the UK, we're going to need a lot of both. And it gives us that opportunity to really drive down carbon emissions from the built environment and to store more carbon. And on the carbon storage, we were sort of crunching some figures recently, and we shared them with the sustainability working group of the Cibois network at a European level. And we looked at it was looking at the UK specifically, and we know that the British government are keen on technical carbon capture and storage, the idea of storing carbon underneath the North Sea, underneath the Irish Sea. And that is something that we definitely need to tackle climate change. We will need that. The government are clear, the Independent Committee on Climate Change are clear, and the UN are clear. We need to have CCS. But it's expensive, and it's not really tried and tested at scale. Now, we're going to go for it in the UK, and hopefully by 2028, storage will have started. And it's coming in with a kind of price tag of that's pretty expensive, around about 22 billion pounds to do this. So it's a big price tag spread over 10 years. And it'll store about 8.5 million tons of carbon. And that's a big figure, but we could also store 8.5 million tons of carbon in the built environment over the same kind of time period. And it wouldn't come with a hefty price tag to the taxpayer because the technology is proved and tested. There are things the government could and need to do to help facilitate that. Public procurement of timber buildings or the support of more timber via public procurement would help, especially on those bigger buildings. But we can store a heck of a lot of carbon equivalent to what CCS can do in the built environment.
Just sorry, go on, Mike.
No, I was going to sort of quickly go back to that. You were talking about mid-rise engineered timber buildings being the sort of target market to go after, and that's perfect for urban development, isn't it? In particular, and the world population is increasingly urbanizing, so you've got the perfect scenario there. You've got an ideal way of building urban centre construction, and you've got this urbanising population. So it's a double benefit.
Yes, and I think he's mentioned hybrid. And there's definitely a place for hybrid. I mean, we're not by any means at all opposed to hybrid. There's a great example going up in Milwaukee, or I think it's finished now, and it's around 20 stories, and the lower third is concrete and steel, the kind of traditional build of the last 100 years, and then the top 2/3 is engineered timber, mass timber.
Yeah.
And there's that is far better than building 18 stories of concrete and steel.
Yeah. So moving on then to what some people perceive as the bête noire of the timber industry, which is fire. I mean, I'm conscious of the fact we want to cover a bit more, but briefly, what's your views on that in the book, Paul?
So it's, I would say it used to be the number one question. I get slipped now. It's the number two question. We can come back to what is the number one question, but it's, if you don't mention it when you're talking about it, you'll get asked about it, and rightly so. So. And I think there's two answers because it's in two parts. So when it comes to family homes, the 2-3 story timber frame, it's the dominant model in Scotland. 92% of the family homes built in Scotland have a timber frame. And the reality is, even if you walk past outside and you go inside, you'll be none the wiser that it was timber framed because the timber's been encapsulated. And that's the easiest way of dealing with the fire issue is there's a layer of brick or some type of render on the outside, which protects the outside frame from coming into any contact with fire. And on the inside, you've plasterboarded the walls, which protects the frame internally. And if we go back to some of the bigger builds, they've done exactly the same. So what was the tallest timber building for a while in Vancouver, student accommodation, 18 stories. The only part of the mass timber frame that was exposed was on the top floor.
Yeah.
Everything else was, all other 17 floors were encapsulated behind fireboard and on the outside as well. So that's the easiest way of dealing with the fire issue, is to encapsulate. On the bigger builds, we're seeing a mix of activities, so some encapsulation, but we're also seeing the beams, if you like, the mass timber, whether it's the CLT or the glulam, being painted with a fire retardant paint. Often gives the wood a slightly creamy look. You can still see the grain, but it whitens it up, and that will add in an extra layer of resistance. The bigger builds will all now have an advanced sprinkler system. And the fire testing of the engineered or the mass timbers is showing that it meets the fire regulations in that you get a charring of the external area, which then acts as a barrier to prevent the fire from reaching the next layer of wood, and therefore it sort of burns in stages. And given that these buildings aren't built in the middle of nowhere, they're built in urban areas, the fire brigade's response time will then mean they've arrived and will be able to extinguish the building. Obviously, if you set it on fire and just leave it, like any other building, it would eventually burn down. And that's worth remembering, is that all buildings burn, irrespective of what they're made from, primarily because first the contents catch fire, and then if the fire's not put out, it can spread to the frame. And at high temperatures, steel will buckle, and you'll get collapse. At high temperature, concrete explodes and is problematic. And if you didn't put the fire out in a timber building, be it small or be it large, eventually the frame would catch fire and continue to burn. So I do have a good friend here in Newcastle who was with the Tyne and Wear Fire Brigade for all of his working life. He's retired now. And he said that as firefighters, they felt it was less worse going into a timber building on fire because of the predictability of the burn. Not that it wouldn't burn, but it would burn in a predictable way. And that concrete and steel were more worrisome from a firefighter's point of view. So we always should be incredibly careful of fire. We need to be very mindful, certainly in the UK context, of the horror of Grenfell, over 70 people killed, in an advanced modern city with a high quality fire brigade, etc. It's bloody dangerous. But there's nothing to say that a timber building, whether it's a small timber frame building or a large engineered timber building, if designed and built properly, is any more dangerous than any other material.
And looking forward, do you think, to actually sort of really kind of drive the take-up of timber in construction, and particularly and bio-based materials in construction generally, to substitute concrete, steel and other sort of energy-intensive materials, do we need more political intervention? It is happening in some places, isn't it? In France, there are rules about public buildings using a percentage of bio-based material. Do you think we need more of that? Is that going to happen?
Well, I think we need a level playing field, and it does vary from country to country around Europe. It's ironic that both Finland and Sweden, the two of the biggest timber producing countries in Europe, haven't, or relatively recently, had legislation which has meant that within their cities they've not been able to build tall timber buildings or large timber buildings. And they've been exporting their engineered timbers around the world, but initially not using them themselves. But we've seen those regulations now being amended and changed. And I think we're not asking to be treated any differently from any other material, but we just would like to be able to build certainly mid-rise timber buildings that meet the revised fire regulations. I mean, there's a lot of testing of engineered timber has gone on and continues to go on, where in laboratory conditions, the timber's deliberately set on fire to see how it responds, etc., and how long the structural strengths will remain intact. And we are as keen as anyone. The last thing the industry needs, the last thing the industry would need, is a devastating fire in a big timber building in which people died.
Yes,
that would just be awful beyond belief. Obviously at a personal level first and foremost, but secondly, then it would damage the industry and the confidence.
Yes.
So I think France is one of the countries that is sort of leading the way. US and Canada are good. We have more mass timber buildings in Europe than in North America at the moment.
Right.
But the speed at which the North Americans are now building them, they will overtake the Europeans relatively soon on the number of mass timber buildings. And as each year goes by, and we have more and more of them, and more with the record of there not being a problem, then I think that builds the confidence. I think in the UK, we're going to maybe have to wait a little bit longer in relation. There's a long tail to the Grenfell fire. We've had the public inquiry, but now people need to remember that the findings of the public inquiry are now with the Metropolitan Police to decide whether there's going to be any prosecutions. And until we've been through that next phase, I can understand why the authorities, the GLA, etc., aren't going to be signing off tall timber bills in London. Having said that, we can build up to 7 stories in London, and that still means there's a lot of opportunity to build with timber, including engineered timber. I visited the Paradise building in Vauxhall a couple of weeks ago. That's at 7 stories. And given the size of its footprint, it is now the largest timber office in the UK. Very impressive building next to the railway line coming into Waterloo. Beautiful building, fantastic working space. And it could have been apartments. It was, as it happens, offices. So we can still build some pretty big buildings in the UK. And I think in 3 or 4 years' time, I think that level will go up. We'll be able to do 10, 12.
Thanks. We're going to have to wrap up in a minute or two. Any last key point you want to make sure you get out in the podcast, Paul?
Well, I hinted there that fire is no longer the first number one question.
Yes,
I think it's been replaced by, and in a way this is a good sign, is that we're getting asked more and more, but is there enough timber? Is there enough sustainable timber to have a massive increase in timber building? So the more we win the argument about building more with timber, the more we get asked, but is there enough timber? And is it sustainable?
And it's a valid question.
The short answer is yes, but it has many components to it to unpick. So I mentioned material efficiency. That's a key part of it. We should be using as little wood to build as much with as possible. And in simple terms, for instance, CLT, cloth laminated timber, is a wonderful material, but to build a 3-story building, 4-story, 5-story with CLT, yes, we can do it, but maybe we should be using laminated veneered lumber to do that, with the thinner layers. And because to do it, you'll end up using less timber. So that material efficiency is part of that. I was in Nantes about a year ago at one of their top-end sawmills where they had new state-of-the-art X-ray machines and scanners. So when the log came in from the forest, they're scanning it to work out the best way of cutting it to get the most wood out of it. So there's as little waste, in inverted commas. Not that we ever have any waste in the timber value chain, but as much of it as possible is going into the construction timber. So that's part of what we need to do as well. And certainly in the UK, we do need to expand our forest cover. It's rather pitifully low at around 13-14%. And in England, it's even lower. We have very little commercial forestry in England. So we need to increase the supply The Scandinavians definitely can supply us with more timber. I mean, Sweden's our big supplier at the moment, and there's more capacity for more timber to come through. There's a mixture of things we can do. They're just a few of them. But I think for the foreseeable future, we could double the amount of timber used in UK in construction without any particular problem at all.
Yeah.
As we get closer to 2050 and the net zero target, and we're maybe pushing up towards maybe 50% of our houses being timber built, timber framed, and 50% of our bigger buildings, then yes, we're going to have to look more closely at how we ensure that that supply is sustainable. And on the longer term, there's no getting away from it. The biggest forest mass in the world is in Russia, and we will need globally to access that timber, and that's obviously and rightly off limits at the moment until the war ends, the illegal invasion ends of Ukraine. But we can get timber from Belarus, timber from Ukraine, timber from Russia, which will expand the supply, in 20, 30, 40 years' time.
Thank you.
But in the short term, there's certainly no problem at all.
Yeah. Well, we're going to have to bring it to a close.
No, it's very interesting. Thank you. Yeah.
It is. I mean, go on, Mike.
No, I was going to say, it sounds very, there are challenges, there are issues and problems, as there are with most things. But overall, the message sounds positive that this is the direction we're going to go in. Yeah,
and people can get the book. Paul, how's the best to eat? What's the easiest way to get the book?
Well, most of the bigger bookshops usually have a single copy in my experience. Yeah. Timber How Wood Can Help Save the World from Climate Breakdown is in most of the bigger bookshops, and of course you can order it online. Yeah. And that's amazing, that system these days. You can order something, I'm not going to name any companies, but you can do that and you'll have it tomorrow if you want.
Exactly.
Or certainly in 3 days' time if you don't want to spend too much on the postage.
Yeah.
And it has sold well. The publisher's pleased. He's got just over 100 authors on the books, and I'm in the top 25% for sales.
Excellent.
And
let's hope we get you up into the top 10. That's our aim. And,
that would be great.
Yeah. Sunday Times bestsellers.
Yeah. And thanks ever so much for sparing the time, Paul.
It's been very interesting.
Really, I'm sorry we haven't been able to cover every chapter, but I hope that's given our listeners a bit of a flavour.
Yeah.
And it's a positive story, isn't it? It's a really positive story. So it's great. Thank you very, very much indeed.
Thanks, Paul.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Pleasure. Now, so that was great.
Yeah.
Really enjoyed that.
Yeah, it was very interesting.
I mean, you've known Paul a long time. I've known Paul a long time, so that helps a little bit. But I genuinely do say I enjoyed reading that.
No, it's very good. Yeah, an easy read.
Yeah,
I went through it like a dose of salts.
We had a chap who used to work with me actually took the time and trouble to write to Paul, and I know he made a few comments about the book.
Yeah.
But his underlying commentary was, I've really, really gained a lot from reading this book.
Yeah.
And he's a young guy early in his career. So it seems to be hitting exactly the target market that Paul said.
As Paul said, some of the sort of stark warnings about sort of climate change and the impact of the construction industry in terms of carbon emissions. I mean, that's pretty stark stuff.
Yeah.
But that's dealt with in a very sort of level way, I thought, and then the rest of the book is about the solution.
Pulls no punches, does it?
No, not at all. But I think the positivity that comes out of it is great as well. You come away with a kind of
Yeah, I just like the fact that it's a very honest appraisal and summary of where we are, and it's a clarion call, I think, for a lot of people.
Yeah.
So no, I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting the audience that it's fundamentally targeted at those young people coming into construction, coming into the sort of construction product supply sector. It's just what that.
But it just shows
needs.
It does just shows that, doesn't it? Just how little people get of timber. We just need to somehow get that message across more, and the book is clearly going to help.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. Good one. Thanks.
Excellent.